Hello lads, how are we doing? Video 2. We're on Remains today by Simon Armitage, which is this lad here, with the pen in his mouth, handsome looking chap. What I'm going to do, I'm going to run you through a little bit of context first. We'll read the poem and then I'll rumble through and do the annotations just like we did before. Okay? Fairly simple. So this is Simon Armitage here. He's a current poet laureate in the UK, and he used to be a probation officer, and he did some work with young people, young offenders in particular, and he did a study when he was at university. He went to Manchester University, where he did a study on the effect of video game violence on young people, and this, The Not Dead, is part of a poetry collection / interview program that he made for the TV about soldiers, and particularly PTSD, the effects of warfare on their psychology. This particular poem is one of two that are used on GCSE syllabi, should I say, by Simon Armitage from this collection. There's another one called Laura's Poem, which I'll show you later on, which is really good to go alongside this one. Anyway, a little bit more context. So, post 9/11, which was in 2001, the USA invaded Afghanistan and later Iraq also. And obviously British forces were involved in that as an ally to America. These two are buddies. Okay. And obviously we had a lot of British soldiers over in Afghanistan. You can see some of them here. Some on UN peacekeeping patrols, some of them out in the streets of various different Middle Eastern cities, in battle with the Taliban, and eventually this warfare came to an end a few years ago. Now, it went on for an awful long time. It left people doing tours of Iraq and Afghanistan and coming back home on leave to Britain. And this collection of poetry here, The Not Dead, was where Simon Armitage interviewed some of these soldiers and asked them for their experiences in this war zone. And if you try to get in your head the dry, arid climate here from these pictures, and potentially maybe think about the impact of this kind of hard-fought technological warfare that's going on, you'll get a feel for who he's talking about here. His background as a probation officer leaves him very much interested in psychology, and his interest in this poem in particular, we'll come to the title in a minute and what it means, but his interest, I think, in this poem is about the effects of warfare on the mind. So this is very much a power and conflict poem, which is the conflict, which is literal here, which is war, and then the conflict that remains, psychologically speaking, for these soldiers once they are back in the UK. Okay, do this one a little bit differently. I'll talk about the title in a minute, but I'm going to do a little read through first, just so it's nice and clear. Then, as usual, I'll do our ideas. Fighting with me. We'll do our ideas in blue. We'll do our language, structure and form in red, and then our context in green there as well. Okay, so read through the poem first of all. Title is Remains, and it goes like this. On another occasion, we got sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank, and one of them legs it up the road, probably armed, possibly not. Well, myself and someone else are all of the same mind, so all three of us open fire. three of a kind, all letting fly, and I swear I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. So we've hit this looter a dozen times, and he's there on the ground, sort of inside out, pain itself, the image of agony. One of my mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body. Then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. End of story, except not really. His blood shadow stares on the street, and out on patrol I walk over it week after week. Then I'm home on leave, but I blink and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed, possibly not. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds. And the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand, but near to the knuckle, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Okay, so I'll start by doing a little timeline. So very simply, here's the events. This is the start, this is the end. Very simple. We've got a soldier who's out on patrol in Afghanistan or Iraq here. They encounter what they believe to be are some people who are robbers. They're potentially not. And they open fire. And they kill this suspect. Later on in the poem, he heads back to the UK. He's on leave. And he feels guilty. He can't get this out of his head. And it's similar to later on in the poem here where he said he was out on patrol. So we've got this physical reminder of what he's done, and then we've got this mental reminder of what he's done. By the end of the poem where it says, his bloody life in my bloody hands, essentially what we're exploring here is this decision whether it was right to kill or not. Was he under the remit of war? Was it a judicious killing, or could this person have been innocent? Probably not, and possibly not is the line that was repeated. Alright, so first thing is remains the title itself. We can take this allegorically, as we can do with most of the poetry we look at in this anthology with their titles. Remains here has got connotations of a physical remains, as in a body. So when somebody dies, we might say that their remains, that's their physical body, that remains behind. So it talks about a dead body very literally, but remains also means what is left over. So if you think about your maths here, your remainder, what remains after you've completed your calculation. So here we've got the psychological. The psychological remains, and then the actual physical remains. Okay. Alright, let's make a start with this then. So it starts very much in the present tense. On another occasion we got sent out. This is past, but it kind of begins in media res here. This is an interview. So very much it's got this conversational tone of an interview. The speaker here is being interviewed by our poet, by Armitage. On another occasion we got sent out, but Armitage assumes the role of a soldier. So this soldier is speaking, he's telling us a story. This is very much a narrative poem. That much is AO2, because that's your structure there, okay? So it's a narrative poem, and you can see that as evidenced in the inclusive pronoun here, which does imply that they are part of a team, they are a unit, they very much are a battalion, for example. What's interesting here is this verb as well. We got sent out. These guys are following orders. So ideas about duty there. You can link this quite nicely to charge of the Light Brigade, if you like, for a little comparison there. The idea that you're only following orders, you're doing what you should do, what you've been asked to do by the people above you in power. Right, next. We get sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank. Tackle's interesting to me because it makes it sound like some sort of, I don't know, a rugby tackle here, for example. It means to solve, to fix this problem. They've just been sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank. Now, a little bit of AO3 for you here. Looters, these are people who take advantage of either a social order breakdown, or maybe if there's a riot going on, they go in and steal from, I don't know, banks, hardware stores usually, technology stores. So when there's some sort of civil unrest, they take advantage. So really, you wonder, is this part of the soldier's remit here? This seems almost like a civil matter, I suppose. So they're becoming more like police than they are really soldiers, to tackle looters that are raiding a bank. If you want here, you can have the present tense verb there, raiding a bank. Maybe there's something to say particularly about global finance there if you want to be fancy. It's up to you. And one of them legs it up the road. So this is a conversational tone, isn't it? He's going to use colloquial language throughout this poem. It's going to be very relaxed, his tone, which to me, if I was going to say something here, I'd talk about the contrast between the tone of the poem and the subject matter. They seem to be in opposition. Very light-hearted tone, very tough subject matter, and later on it is going to get a little bit darker, although it's a very honest tone. He ends the first stanza by saying, and one of them legs it up the road, probably armed, possibly not. And this is going to be a dichotomy that's going to establish itself and flow through the rest of the poem. So he kind of hopes that the subjects that he's chasing are armed, but he recognises the possibility that maybe they're not. So when these looters are killed, we have to ask ourselves, was that the right thing to do? So they were probably armed, but possibly not. So they're not taking any chances. But they have been well trained, these soldiers, because myself and somebody else are all of the same mind. I'll talk to you a little bit about those lines now. So, first of all, I would be saying, myself, it's interesting that he puts himself first here. This is like beginning the sentence with I, which is not what you would normally do formally. You would put the other people first. However, he doesn't know their names. He does call them mates in the poem later on, so it's a little bit strange that he doesn't know their names. So what we've really got here is anonymity. These soldiers are not being given their proper names. Or you can say that here we've got, they're essentially becoming pronouns. They are like he or she. They're not given their proper names. Probably, maybe to protect them. Up to you, whatever you say there. Well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind. So their reaction to this bank being robbed is almost instinctive, almost immediate. They go straight for the guns, straight for death, straight for violence. So you can say what you like about the proper soldier's response here. They're all of the same mind. They see a suspect and they attack. So all three of us open fire. It repeats, all three, so you've got the repetition. So it's all of them, it's us, it's we, they are together, they remain part of a team. All three of us open fire, three of a kind, all letting fly. So what I would be saying here, three of a kind, again, this shows that they're all in a team. This is the repetition again of the three. Letting fly seems to be, to me, a little bit this choice of language, you call it euphemistic, I suppose, but letting fly, it almost makes it sound worse, this action of shooting these people that these soldiers complete. They let fly, so it almost sounds like they're enjoying it. It's like an excuse to use their weapons. You could also say that this conveys the violence of the guns, letting fly. If you want, you can talk about bullets flying as some sort of personification if you so wish. And I swear, and this is where you start to see him do this continually now. So, in a mess there. We see a consistent enjambment. It is really structural, so I should have you as your AO2 there. But it happens repeatedly, and I swear I see every round sort of inside out pain itself. He continues these ideas across these stanzas. This is going to be particularly important when we get to the final stanza, because structurally speaking, it is mostly in 4-line stanzas, which we call quatrains. However, by the end, he ends in what is a kind of a couplet, 2 lines. You'll see why that's important later on. There's quite a lot of emphasis there. What's interesting here is he begins with the personal pronoun. I see every round as it rips through his life. I'll give you a little bit of context here. It was an enormous loss of life. Of civilian life, particularly, and what soldiers had difficulty with, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan, was that this is what you call guerrilla warfare, essentially. So they found it very difficult to tell who was civilian and who was enemy. Because the Taliban particularly infiltrated the civilian population. So it was very similar to lots of guerrilla warfare tactics that you see, where the soldiers find it very difficult to tell who is guilty, who's not, who's part of the enemy, who's not, which makes all of this entirely more difficult. I see every round as it rips through his life. Okay, I'll be saying something about this verb. It rips through his life. This is very violent. The verb itself, it's almost like he's cut in half. Very nasty. And I see broad daylight on the other side. The repetition here of I see and I see. So you've got your sensory, particularly his eyes here, what he can see. He sees every round. These are the bullets. And he sees broad daylight on the other side. To me, this is a wonderful piece of imagery here. I see broad daylight on the other side. So if you can imagine, do a little bit of context here. So if he's got a target that he's shooting at and he fires a range of bullets and they put holes in his target, you know that the light is going to stream through that target from then on. So when it says, I see daylight on the other side, to me that metaphor is very much literal holes. We know that a body, obviously, if it was struck by some bullets, light wouldn't shine through the body, so this is exaggerated, isn't it? There are literal holes, but the light cannot shine through. So this is very much for emphasis. So weave, that's inclusive. Hit this looter a dozen times. Now you can talk about this looter. He remains nameless as well. He's anonymous. There's almost a dehumanization. This looter a dozen times. So they've shot him 12 times. That could be exaggeration, but if we know that there's 3 of them, that's 4 bullets each. Doesn't take that many to kill somebody. 1 is enough. So we've hit this looter a dozen times, and there he's there on the ground, sort of inside out. Now, give you a little bit of context for this one. There was a bit of a controversy, which turned out to be nonsense, around some newspaper headlines around the time where some civilians in this conflict were shown to be abused by soldiers. Some photographs were leaked. It turned out that had then been photoshopped, but there were very many cases of civilians in both of these conflicts who were mistreated by some soldiers. I can show you some information about that if you come and give me a shout, and we'll give you some. So this person, this looter, is sort of inside out. We know that this is really graphic, isn't it? It's disgusting. We know that this person has been dehumanized. They are turned into essentially what is no longer human. They are now simply remains, literal physical remains, but they're sort of inside out. So it's almost like they're being treated like, I don't want to use the word roadkill here, but that might give you an idea of the severity of this graphic imagery. He says that they are pain itself. That's personification. So this person who's lying on the floor is the very embodiment of pain itself. It's a big word for you, I'll give you that one. The very embodiment of pain itself. The image of agony. There's a little bit of listing going on there, as you can see. Sort of inside out, pain itself, the image of agony. So even this soldier who is exposed to this kind of thing continually is shocked, horrified. And then he says, one of my mates goes by, and this to me, I don't know if he's being ironic here, or he's just being colloquial. But he says, one of my mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body. So again, this is severely graphic. Tosses, your verb there, makes it sound like he has literally come along with his shovel and we've got our body here on the floor, and he has scooped whatever entrails or whatever, I don't know, horrible components, horrible guts and gore that are on the floor there, and he scraped them and put them straight back into the guy's body. So very disgusting. Back into his body. Very grisly, as you can imagine. So that he's not treating him. And this is what happens in war. A little bit of context here. So we tend to dehumanize the enemy. In warfare, we tend to treat them as less than ourselves. So here, where he tosses his guts back into his body, he would never do that to one of his fellow soldiers. So the dehumanization of the enemy here is very much, shall we say, a response probably to being in that environment for a long time and facing what he feels is a constant battle to find out who actually is the enemy and who is the civilian. So the longer he stays out there, the more he's in this environment, the more he becomes, I don't know, lacking in, shall we say, basic compassion. And our speaker here very much seems to be in the position of disgust from this. Then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. Okay, so this verb here makes him sound like cargo, doesn't it? In the back of a lorry. So really this back of a lorry is his hearse. So he is dead. He is being transported. However, these connotations of carted, this is kind of like you might do with your shopping. Or I don't know, a golf cart, for example. Equipment. He's shoved into the back of the lorry as if he is, I don't know, a water bottle on D&V or I don't know, ammunition that would go into the back of these trucks. Okay, so he goes into the flatbed on the back of the truck. We've got this body in here. So this is now a makeshift hearse, which is what's used to carry a dead body. That's the name for a dead body there if you want. Which brings us on to the second part. So then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. I just want to point out that there is a full stop here. So that is kind of the first little piece of narration. We have the incident, we have somebody who's killed, and he says that this is the end of the story, except not really. So we've got that full stop, end of story, except not really. So this seems to be a contradiction. End of story, except not really. So we know that the story should be over. But there seems to be, what I would say here is a little bit of foreshadowing. And what it essentially foreshadows is his PTSD. So now that this looter is dead, his blood shadow stays on the street, and out on patrol I walk right over it week after week. So this soldier narrating this poem continues to have to spend time in the same place where they pulled the body of this looter from the street, and the blood shadow stays there as a constant reminder. First thing is the pronoun. So his, that's the victim. He remains nameless. Now we don't know if he's gone and found out his name. That might be quite difficult for him. Or we don't know if it's too hard for him to say his name. His blood shadow, this is a metaphor. If you try to think of, I suppose, if we've got our dead body in the street here, who's been shot down, and then I try to hose it down, I hose away there, but no matter how much I hose away, that dead body, that blood is soaked in. Now this is a very arid land, obviously, so we've got this dead body lying on the pavement, and even though the body is no longer there, the blood stain remains. So this is very much linking back to the title. It stays on the street. The verb stay means to remain. And out on patrol, I walk over it week after week. So this obviously starts to have a psychological impact. We can bring in our PTSD there as well. He has to continue on. He's on patrol. He would probably be for months at a time on these tours, and then he would get a break and go home for a while. And this is where he says, but then I'm home on leave. So we've got a little bit of a change. We've got a bit of a temporal shift. So at this point, he's home on leave. So the setting changes. At this point, he goes back to the UK. And he's back in the UK. But even when he's back in the UK and he doesn't have this very physical reminder, physical reminder of the body, he blinks. This is present tense. I blink. And he bursts again through the doors of the bank. So it's like it's happening again. So this is present tense. And it's when he blinks. So this is when you close your eyes. So it's connotations of when he's sleeping or is conscious. So it's his waking thought. He bursts again through the doors of the bank. He says when he sleeps, it's the same. He's probably armed and possibly not. So he repeats this phrase. He goes over this again and again and again. If I try to sleep, he's probably armed and possibly not. You can have the alliteration if you want. I would avoid saying something about that. I would talk more about the adverbial phrases. The adverbs probably, possibly. These are modifying the meaning, aren't they? Probably armed. It means that he might not be armed, and possibly not suggests that we don't know. So essentially what he's exploring is, was he unarmed, which makes it murder, or if he was armed, which kind of makes it his duty to protect life, I suppose. He says, when I dream and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds. We've got the consistency there. We know those 12 shots he talked about earlier on. So he's repeating the same idea, a dozen rounds. So he repeats that he's torn apart, the verb, torn apart, so literally. It's happening again and again. Essentially this section, he is reliving the memory. He is having a flashback. Which we call an analepsis. And he's kind of using one here. So he's torn apart by a dozen rounds. And he tries to fix it, our soldier. He says that the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. So the drink and the drugs, which we both know to be depressants and stimulants, are both things that he tries to cure to allow him to sleep. They won't flush him out is the verb. This is hugely ironic here, but to give you a little bit of context as well, substance abuse in vets of any kind of warfare is always significantly higher than that of the rest of the population, due to the PTSD that they've often experienced. So he tries drink and he tries drugs in order to try and forget. He wants to forget. He wants to be able to relax. But no matter what he does, he's always got this guilt or this question. Was I right to shoot this person? Was it the right thing to do? He says he is here in my head when I close my eyes. This is obviously metaphorical. Here in my head. You could say it's hyperbolic if you want. He is figuratively here in my head when I close my eyes, which means he's always on his mind. He cannot get rid of it. He can't escape the feeling that he could have done something differently. Here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines. There's a little bit of irony in this line. Dug in, we've got the verb. This has got connotations, particularly of trench warfare and the idea of stubbornness. So he's being stubborn, dug in. He won't go away no matter what he does. If you want to make a simple comparison here, this is very much Lady Macbeth and her hands. No matter how much she washes them, she can't get rid of that feeling. It remains, if you like. He is dug in, this victim or this villain, depending on your standpoint there. He's dug in behind enemy lines. I think this is an interesting line. A little bit of context here. So if we say behind enemy lines, if we say that our narrator is from the UK, for the sake of argument, let's say that our villain is from Afghanistan, these borders between them, he has moved, the Afghani has moved over to the UK. Even when he's at home, he's still in his head behind enemy lines. So again, that kind of refers to trench warfare. If you've got the idea of our side being here and your side being there, you don't really go between them. You'd be spying. So he's a little bit of a spy, I suppose, in that regard. He's behind enemy lines, not left for dead. I just refer you back to the title of his anthology here, The Not Dead, where he should be. He is not left for dead. So this is the name of the anthology, or very similar to it at least. But he hasn't been left for dead. The verb there, left for dead. To be left for dead also means to be abandoned in some distant, sun-stunned and smothered land. I don't need to tell you how powerful this is. Distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land. So we've got the listing. We've got the use of very clear sibilants here. And these adjectives. Sand-smothered, sun-stunned, distant. He should be instead 6 feet under in desert sand, but he's not. So he is literally, he has been buried, but metaphorically, he lives in his mind. Or his memory, if you like. Okay? So he's not in that desert sand. Essentially, he wants to leave him behind. He wants to think of Iraq or Afghanistan as somewhere separate, somewhere foreign, somewhere remote. But he's not able to do that, unfortunately. He says, he is here in my head when I close my eyes. He is not where I left him in desert sand. So he's not in that sun-stunned and sand-smothered land or 6 feet under in desert sand. But, and this is a structural change. So this conjunction is very important. But, and if we refer back to here, the end of the story, we know that this conjunction tells us that it's not the end of the story. That was the end of the story. He died. I went home. But he's no longer dead. He is here, behind my eyes, near to the knuckle, here and now. So here, now, both of these words connote the immediacy of this feeling. He uses this pronoun again, his life, in my hands. So this is possessive. And this pronoun is one of anonymity as well. So he ends the poem with essentially what is 2 lines for emphasis. Everything else has been 4-line stanzas. He finishes on what is essentially a couplet, but it's not rhyming. Now, hands obviously doesn't rhyme, but near to the knuckle, here and now, that sense of immediacy, his bloody life in my bloody hands. And he repeats, bloody. And you can take this 2 ways. So it can be the literal blood, or it can be the metaphorical blood. So this is either his body, or it's the guilt. More likely to be this metaphorical guilt that he feels. So, just to finish off this last little bit again, he's here in my head when I close my eyes, not left for dead in some distant sun-smothered land, or 6 feet under in the desert sand, but near to the knuckle, here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Just to finish off, a little bit of context for you. Contextually speaking, both of these Middle Eastern wars were very, best way to describe them would probably be to say they were controversial. Many people in the UK didn't want the United Kingdom to go to war with the US against Afghanistan and Iraq, and because of that, many people thought it was an unjust war. So here where he says, not left for dead, and he got these ideas of feeling guilty, all of this guilt could be an allegory, if you like. A little bit of AO2 there for you. It could be allegorical for Britain's involvement. Okay, right. Just to go back up to remind you, you can find all of these, they're not dead, if you just YouTube it, and you can listen to the interviews with these soldiers that Simon Armitage used to create these poems. I would encourage you to do so. It would be really, really useful. Much better to hear Simon Armitage or some of the soldiers perform them as well, because he used all of the information that they give him. Okay, 2 down. Hope that one was useful for you as well. I will post up all of the notes on the Firefly for you. Okay, thanks, guys.